Hi, and welcome to the Literary Sipper. This is your host, Amber Beatty Hill, and today we are going to be talking about making time for visual stimulation. Why is it so important to look at art when you're an artist? Seems so obvious, doesn't it? I mean, listen to music if you are a musician, read if you're a writer. But I think going to look at art, obviously for a visual artist, it's important to be inspired by the very mediums that you are excited to produce yourself. But I think any creative has a certain connection to the visual artists because that's how we process information through observation. And in sort of exercising our eyes and what we see, we can connect to our brains in a different way, to our hearts in a different way, and to our emotional self so that we can produce the kinds of work that touch people in all of those places. Borrow from the Wizard of Oz, I guess, in your brain, your heart, and your courage, your gut. So I wanted to speak a little bit about an experience I had when I was in London this summer. I, of course, love all of the museums in London, but it was the first time I had been to the National Portrait Gallery there and really found myself taken aback by the expanse of history, the expanse of medium from video to traditional oil paintings and storytelling that happened in that space. And I could have gone there every day, I think, and seen something new. But the exhibit that really struck me and powered this sort of topic in a lot of ways was a room dedicated to one artist. And that is not typical in that space. Mostly it is grouped by historical era or theme versus just the work of one particular artist. But this is the work of Colin Davidson, who was born in Belfast. And these are his portraits of 18 people who were affected by the Troubles, which are the conflict in Northern Ireland that lasted for 30 years, entitled Silent Testimony. And they are large-scale portraits of a very impressionistic sort of style. I use that word sort of because it reminds me more of Hockney than it does Monet or something. But they are so powerful. It is heads and shoulders, and they are large-scale paintings, maybe, 45 by 55. But they go through the stories of regular people and elevating their lives to portraits that are housed in a building next to portraits of Henry VIII, next to portraits of the Beatles. And it gives them a gravitas. It gives them a mastery that is so important. And what was so powerful about them were the stories were so ordinary. One person's husband was walking to the market and a bomb went off. One person lost her son who went to a bar one night and never came home. There were people of all ages, and the memories that they encapsulated in the small little plaquettes next to the paintings, these large paintings that filled the room, were so magnetic that even my 12-year-old son stayed in that room and read every single one of them. And so we were there for 45 minutes just in one space reading each person's story and absorbed all of the melancholy, the sadness, the anger, the wounds of the people who experienced these troubles in a lifetime that we were a part of. And of course, this is what great art does, right? It makes us stay still long enough to realize how connected we all are. And it is the storytelling that allows us to stay connected throughout centuries, throughout cultures, throughout countries. And so if we can get to those stories in the fastest way possible, which I think is through art, visual art. We can get into that place of creation in the fastest way. So a song might take 3 to 5 minutes. Of course, writing takes a lot longer. Reading takes a lot longer. Cooking a meal takes longer to transport us through memory of smell. But visual art can put us in the presence of something else very quickly and can often be the opening ceremony for someone's own creative enterprise. So when I do workshops, I often start with a painting to put us in this space. And visual stimulation has always inspired us. I mean, when you look at stained glass or you look at the Gothic cathedrals or the Sistine Chapel, it has been about power and transcendence all along. But also when you look at ancient paintings, caves, it is always connected to storytelling, the story of the hunt, the story of fertility, the story of nature. And it is about the explanation of the universe. And in science, of course, we've learned that, looking at visual arts promotes brain plasticity. It allows us to reorganize and form thoughts quicker in our brains so that we can recognize pattern and we can recognize emotional pattern as well in all of those things. And I am just struck sometimes by the choices that we make as a culture to sort of move away from art as a power in and of itself. So you see a lot of, here in Seattle, they're closing one of the museums, Bellevue Art Museum. They're trying to find financing for it to reopen it. You see a lot of the benefactoring that has happened over the years kind of disappearing out of the visual art space. You're seeing a lot more, obviously, marketplace arts, which is great, but it's changing the way we can look at large-scale art. When you walk through a Richard Serra sculptural maze, there is very little on this planet that's similar to that experience when you realize what a person has built that for the sole experience of for you to have an alternate reality here on Earth. And I look at the school funding and how, the first on the chopping block is always art and music. But my children went through elementary school. The most essential part of elementary school is art. It's about exploration and creativity and working within bounds and working within your imagination. And they went through their elementary school process here in Washington State without an art class. And so one of my older son went from having this prolific art teacher in Massachusetts to having no art in the classroom at all. They had small art projects that, of course, the teachers would do, that, borderline on crafts. And they had an art docent program where parents would come in and do an art lesson with the students. But it was not the same and does not elevate the visual arts to the same realm as math, as science, as history. And some would argue that it shouldn't be, but I would look at the way our world works right now and how much film and graphic design and art informs your everyday. Go a day without looking at the work of an artist. Even your iPad covers probably has a graphic on it. Wallpaper has graphics on it. The covers of books have graphics on them that are powerful. And yet we don't seek that same experience for our children. It just never made sense to me. But in our family, we paid the money to subsidize those experiences. They both took drawing lessons because they wanted to. But there's so much that they learn about themselves, about practice, about sitting still, about observation, about light and darkness, about color, shape, about themselves, about what it is they like and don't like, about what mediums feel good in their hands and what don't, about spatial intelligence. There's so much that comes out of the visual arts that we cannot take for granted and then ultimately eliminate from a child's experience. When I was getting my master's, I instead of staying at the university where I was getting my master's, I took a semester at Juilliard. and did a class where the fundamental question was, what do you see? So, we of course were in New York City, so we went to tons of museums and saw tons of art performances, dance performances, music performances. And the same question began and ended the class, which was, what do you see? So what you see before you have a lecture on the topic. So if we were witnessing dancers from Mozambique, we might talk about literally just what we saw in the dance performance. We saw 8 dancers. We saw them dressed like this. We saw the lights do this. But then we would have a lesson on the history of Mozambique, the history of dance in Mozambique, the history of music in Mozambique, the history of the dance company that performed the dance. And all of a sudden we would see more, we would know more. And that's the power of visual stimulation, whether you're witnessing a dance, which is a very visual act in a lot of ways, or going to a museum. You can look at a painting, you can look at the Mona Lisa, for the most cliche of all, and see things. But when you learn about Leonardo da Vinci or his process or impasto or the Renaissance or whatever, then you see more. You see more. You see more layers. You have more connections. And you then go and try to emulate it or sketch it in a notebook or write a story about it or write a poem about it. You will see even more. So it's making time for visual stimulation is a very, very powerful way to elevate your own experience as a human being, but of course your experience as an artist. When I go to a museum, I feel a part of the artistic community, a community of seekers, and I feel more myself than I do anywhere else. I feel inspired to create. I could stare at a painting for 5 minutes in silence or draw for 5 minutes afterwards. You can practice your way of seeing, and you find the redemption in the mission of art. You find in films like Schindler's List and Amistad this search for redemption, this search for freedom. You find in the artwork of Faith Ringgold, the quilts, you find their texture and their history and their naming a great power in their historical place. And that in itself is the mission of art. And there's a famous Rodin quote, Rodin, the sculptor. For those of you who don't know, he, did The Thinker, which is a very famous one. And then, of course, The Kiss and a million other ones. And if you've never been to the Rodin Museum in Pennsylvania, I recommend it. And then, obviously, the one in France. But the quote that I wanted to read is, "The artist enriches the soul of humanity. The artist delights people with 1,000 unsuspected shades of feeling. The artist reveals spiritual riches until then unknown and gives people new reasons for loving life, new inner lights to guide them." And I think when you make time for visual stimulation, you get to see the artist intention at work. And that allows you to come into contact with consciousness, with the craft, with the desire. They're all married in that moment, and you can enter that trance-like engagement, then put yourself in the trance and put yourself in the presence of the symbol that affects you. So if there are trees or nature or a person's face, like in the Colin Davidson's portraits, you are part of that symbology in that moment. And you seek being yourself and you become part of that story just for a minute, in the way a good book transforms you into another person for that many pages. When you really look and you really see art, you are also a part of those patterns and symbols and universe that are being put on the painting's canvas. If you have never read Alex Gray's The Mission of Art, I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful book about the art of goodwill, the art of transformation, and why artists create. And in that book, he says, art is a natural expression of each artist's unique life force. Our most meaningful creative work comes from deep inside and is an affirmation of the energy and flow of life. Art that affirms life seeds the unconscious of both artist and audience with the positive message, life is worth preserving and encouraging to achieve its highest potential. And so I encourage you this week to find a piece of art that you've never seen before, whether that's looking at it making it your screensaver on your computer or going to a physical museum, which of course is my preference for you to take yourself on a little artist date and have an experience. Stand in front of it. Ask yourself, what do you see? Before you even read the placard, what are you looking at? What is speaking to you from that space? And then do a little reading, whether it's on the topic or the artist or the place the artist is from. And then ask yourself the second time, what do I see? And then when you go home, make sure you've reserved time to reflect on that piece or pay homage to it in some small way. And you'll find yourself inspired once again. I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to The Literary Sipper. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. If you did, please subscribe and leave a rating and review if you're feeling especially generous. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep putting your voice in the world. It's waiting for you.